Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Today's webinar is going to be on mobile surveillance and how LED lighting increases performance. Today's webinar will be around 30-ish minutes, and then we will have a quick Q&A afterwards. Just a little bit of housekeeping from my side. So everybody will remain muted for the entirety of the webinar. Hopefully you can see the GoToWebinar interface. It's usually on the right-hand side of your screen. And within that, there's a little question box. So at the end of the webinar, we'll have a bit of a Q&A. And if you've got any questions as we're going through the webinar, feel free to type them in there, and then we'll be able to, I'll read them out, and we'll answer them when we get to the end of the webinar. So we shall delve straight in. So just to introduce myself, my name's Ellis McCoy. I operate a bit of a split role here at Raytec at the moment. So I look after sales for security and transport, primarily within the UK at the moment, but I also carry out a product management role, so helping our technical marketing and sales teams with regards to new products, providing a little bit of training and hopefully trying to progress our product range. So it's very exciting. Today we'll be going through what makes up mobile security systems, typical use cases, key considerations for end users and providers. Importantly, how to specify lighting. Of course, that's why we're all here, specifically for mobile systems. So the types of light that you can use, configurability, network capability, and other considerations. And then finally, we'll finish up with a Q&A as mentioned. So hopefully there are lots of questions. So let's delve straight in. So what does a mobile system consist of? Obviously, the most important thing is IP cameras. I think without it, it wouldn't make much sense. It would just be a big intruder deterrent system, but the cameras are what makes it. So obviously what we're going to be doing is putting cameras where perhaps you aren't able to, or where it's non-economically viable in order to do so. Now, the beauty of these systems is that they're generally completely modular, and they can satisfy the requirements of the customers to quite a specific degree. So alongside those cameras, hopefully you would have some lighting. So the lighting is there to provide increased performance, make sure that you're seeing everything you need to. Perhaps it could also be used for deterrent lighting, which we'll look at a bit later. However, you might also have a loudspeaker system. So we've used this to great success a number of times in the past, where, for example, the Axis loudspeaker system in conjunction with the Vario white light products to act as a very visual and audible deterrent to deter crime from the point of entry. Along a similar line, you could have a siren. So very much the same sort of deal as a loudspeaker, but just to be a little bit more obtrusive, or if that's the correct word, and it make people very well aware that they shouldn't be there. Perhaps you also have other things such as detection. So you might have an Optex red wall, for example, to surveil or act as detection alongside of a building, or use other sorts of PIR detection systems or lasers. However, there's obviously, that's while you can see physically on a mobile security system, there's a lot else that goes on within that whole setup. So you need to be able to remotely manage these devices, whether that be from an ARC or just via the IP interfaces, being able to log in. And you also, very importantly, need to have external power. And this is really where the mobile security systems come into their own, because ultimately we're going to be putting these where perhaps power is an issue. So why would you be using these kinds of systems? Firstly, temporary site surveillance. So for sites where perhaps they're in a constant state of flux, so there might be a wall here in a week's time, but at the moment it's a potential security hazard. So you don't want to be spending money and time installing a standard security installation as we would normally see it. Having something that can be dropped off, installed and plugged in for a short period of time definitely serves to save time and expense overall. The second thing is a lack of power. So over some sites which cover very large grounds, perhaps there are complete new installations, perhaps actually it's a built up environment, but it's we've seen circumstances where, for example, at the back of buildings which weren't previously considered a security concern, but then they realize that it is, they can't quite get power to it in the short term. So while the infrastructure is provided, they might get a mobile security solution in place to cover the short term. So specifically, let's have a look at some of the examples that we've been a company to. So construction, I think, is the most classical case here, and I know in the UK specifically, construction probably takes up the vast majority of mobile security tower use. The obvious factor here is that the state is in a constant state. The site, sorry, are in a constant state of movement. They're being built up around, and so having fixed cameras doesn't really make sense. You need something that's going to be able to go with the flow of what's happening. And as I mentioned, you know, perhaps there's a building there in a few weeks' time, but at the moment it's just a gap in an area where somebody could get in and damage property. And so these provide a very necessary stopgap while that construction is occurring. The second of which is wind farms, and this is again an area where we've had a lot of success, and specifically with a company called Koi. And this is primarily in the Benelux region where there's a lot of wind farms being built at the moment. Of course, what goes with the nature of these sites is that they're covering vast amounts of land, and quite often, of course, they're in the middle of nowhere, so they don't necessarily have access to mains power, and they're needing to cover big areas of just you know, it might be farmland, it might be scrubland, what have you. So ultimately these systems are probably the only method that you would be able to install security within those areas. Of course, while when the wind turbines are fully installed, security risk perhaps is quite minimal, but when they're during installation, there's going to be a lot of equipment on site and potentially access to places where people shouldn't be going, and so security overall is a definitive requirement. Thirdly, agriculture. So I've been involved in a number of projects where um, you're trying to cover areas of farm sites, for example, which are a long distance away from the farm buildings themselves, and so you have the obvious issues with regards to trying to cover big distances, but actually needing very wide fields of view as well. So rather than perhaps having a camera and a high power illuminator on a building, looking to achieve, you know, 100, 200 meters, but then only being able to cover a small subsection of the territory, maybe it's like a specific gate, which is a point of access. Maybe you could have a mobile security tower installed closer to that point. So you're able to look at a wider area, but B, probably able, because it is simply closer, you're able to get better images and more a better idea of what's happening. Perhaps the very existence of the security solution itself being up close visible acts as a deterrent in its own right as well, because obviously if you've got a PTZ on a building 200 meters away, nobody's going to be able to see that. Whereas if somebody's going to well, we've seen all sorts of stuff like livestock stealing, etc. And if somebody sees that there is a security solution right there on the gate, then it definitely poses a different situation to them. Lastly, event security. So again, this is very much along the same lines as construction in terms of the site's very transient. Fence lines are built up into the middle of city centres, etc., that are going to be coming down a matter of days following. And so having fixed security systems isn't necessarily the way forward, and being able to place towers down ad hoc as and where you need them is definitely a major boon. And we've been involved in some great applications over the past, and on the website you'll be able to find a case study, I believe, for the Commonwealth Games, which we're able to assist with, and that's a perfect example. So key considerations for end users. The first one is obvious, cost-effective and temporary solutions. So as we all know, a customer could be spending tens of thousands on a security system, and then of course there's everything else that goes into that. So perhaps they just want something that's very low key, but ultimately it's going to cost a lot more than just hiring out a tower for the weeks that it might be required for. The second one is that it's fast and hassle-free. So I know quite a few of the providers in particular are able to drop off these towers within a matter of days, configured exactly to the customer requirements. And often, of course, of that they're linked up to an ARC, usually, and hopefully it's an ARC in that specific country. So you've got no language barriers. And I know, for example, BooWatch, they set up specifically a partnership with an English ARC in order so that customers that are using their towers are able to phone very quickly into somebody who can obviously speak the same language and resolve issues very quickly. And so I think from an end user standpoint, being able to have those three things and cost effective, fast, and knowing that the site is fully secure is a very valuable proposition in it of itself. So key considerations providers, what do you need to offer? Dynamic and adaptable. As mentioned, with the towers themselves being very modular based, there's a key benefit to being able to prescribe exactly a solution that a customer requires, whether that be a case of just needing covert surveillance or in fact needing additional deterrent features. And if the latter, you can of course apply a degree of device integration. So for example, if you do have the speaker systems and lighting, perhaps you want it to be controlled via the ARC that the imagery is being streamed back to, or perhaps you want it to operate on an edge basis, being controlled via the camera system or detectors that are actually installed onto the product. And of course, this can also be specified for each individual use case. And as I mentioned, obviously as well, having those integrations will allow you to be able to set up on the fly, especially if they're all IP enabled products. So what's the importance of using dedicated lighting? Ultimately, and I think this is kind of generally an accepted point of view here, is that an external lighting product will always be more powerful than an integrated infrared within a camera. We're just able to provide more power in terms of pure wattage, but also various different sizes of products with different lensing, different angles, so we can really provide lighting exactly where you require it, as opposed to a more cookie cutter mentality of trying to provide best case scenario. So again, when we look back at sites with vast expanses of land that needs to be covered, being able to provide lighting exactly when and where they need it is going to be optimum for your requirements. So specifying lighting for mobile surveillance. First, let's have a look at what types of light there are. First of which is infrared. So I would say 80% of the mobile security towers that we've worked on use just regular 850 nanometers infrared. This is kind of the industry standard. It's what you see in the majority of camera integrated setups. This level of light will provide you with a faint red glow, but it's still fairly covert enough so that if somebody knows what they're looking out for, they'd be able to spot it. But for somebody who is completely unaware, it wouldn't necessarily be obtrusive to them. We do actually also provide 940 nanometers, which we would consider to be full covert, so completely invisible to the human eye for applications where they need it to be fully covert. But we also actually offer lower down on the wavelength, so 730 nanometers. Now, I don't know if I've specifically worked on applications where these towers have been used for ANPR type applications, but if that were the case, then perhaps exploring options within the lower band wavelength would be quite suitable, especially if you're looking to achieve through windscreen type applications where you're trying to see inside of vehicles. As mentioned, so with your standard infrared, you're capturing nighttime images covertly. There's zero light pollution, so that quite often is a constraint, especially when you're installing in built-up environments and also construction sites, which might be near to people's homes. But also from an intruder standpoint, infrared isn't providing any visible light to assist or alert intruders. So again, depending on what you want, do you want it to be a deterrent factor, or do you want it to be completely covert? But ultimately, yeah, they're not going to have any white light in order to see what they're doing as well. Which moves us on to white light. So we often see white light as being used in conjunction with infrared. So you'd have, again, your infrared for the covert nighttime surveillance, but then you'd have white light coming on to be acting as a visual deterrent. And this goes back to what we were mentioning with regards to having a setup where perhaps you've got a speaker system, lighting flashing at an individual. It's definitely a clear indicator that they're not welcome in that environment, and perhaps they should be clearing off. However, white light can also give you other information as well. So it's going to tell you the color of their clothes, give you better facial detail, color of their skin, that kind of thing. So say if you've got man guards on site at a construction site, for example, being able to properly identify an individual could be very useful in finding and tracking that person down. But perhaps having that additional information as well could be used for judicial purposes post-event in order to identify and potentially prosecute an individual for breaking into an area. And of course, we've got the hybrid product, which satisfies both requirements at the same time. And we're utilizing this a lot at the moment. So for example, sites where they maybe need covert surveillance for the majority of time, but actually, again, when we go back to talking about having manned guards, they might need a degree of general area lighting. So lighting purely for somebody patrolling a site in order to see. And we can achieve that very nicely with our hybrid units, which feature both in a single panel. The nice thing about this as well is we do what's called double stacking of LEDs. So essentially you're getting the same power and distance, roughly speaking, about -5% as two dedicated illuminators. So even though it's only half a panel, you're getting pretty much the same power as a full individual panel. So we commonly sell these as being a light which is two for the price of one. In our mind, this is definitely ideal for security, mobile security surveillance, because it's giving you your infrared for surveillance and detection, and then the white light for deterrent and color images. Of course, while this is what we would normally be offering, there are other options on the market. So some of you may have seen green light, for example, which is commonly used by one of the providers. And this is something that we can offer as well, but there are detractors to that. So for example, your camera images will suffer for it. They're simply not as perceptive to that wavelength of light. You're getting poor color rendition accuracy, in fact, non-existent. And generally speaking, the green LEDs aren't going to give you the same type of distance. Saying that, there's certainly the benefit of if an intruder understands what that green light actually means, then it acts as a very logical deterrent feature, which I think perhaps is more commonly identified in some regions rather than other, where it's used more often. While this would be a special from Raytec, this is something that we can offer if required. So configurability. Raytec is very proud of our network lighting. So you can control our products remotely through the IPPoE range. And we see this as being quite perfect for mobile systems. So it would allow you to provide power control. You have a greater degree of control and flexibility over the deterrent flash patterns and speed. So for example, do you want it fast enough so that it's not hampering your camera images? Or do you want it slower and a little bit more obtrusive to an individual walking on the site? You can also alter photocell sensitivity as well, which I think is actually a very understated point too. So for example, if you are installing into a built-up environment where there is general area light on scene, this might prevent the light under normal circumstances from turning on early enough. And so you can change the photocell sensitivity to be more or less sensitive if you want the light to come on earlier or sooner. And that's definitely a great feature that would work very nicely for a product that's going to move from one location to another or one site to another. So how can you control the devices? So we've got two primary methods of control. So first one is the integrated web interface. So the lamps come automatically with DHCP enabled. So you would download our fancy little Disco Man tool. That would find all of the lamps on your system, and you can set them up all of them via that, or you can go onto the individual web interfaces via their IP address that you may set. We also have HTTPS as well, which can be carried out through the Disco Man tool too. The second method of control is via API integration. So we, again, are quite proud of the integrations that we have. So just to name a few, we've got Access, Genetec, Wavestore, Milestone, Avigilon, and Siemens surveillance software. This kind of falls under two categories. So we've got what we would describe as an edge-based application and a VMS, a full-blown VMS integration. So Axis, for example, we integrate with the Axis ACAP platform. So this would allow your camera to talk directly with the lamp, which actually probably is quite perfect for this type of situation. So for example, if you had analytics in your camera, that could trigger a hybrid or a white light lamp to go into a flash pattern upon an intruder being detected. But we also have the likes of an Avigilon integration, which goes into the Avigilon command center software, and that's very much more a full-blown network, VMS platform, which would require network access and its own server, for example. It should also be mentioned that we have the ability for HTTP as well. So even if we don't have a fancy little software plugin that you can download and install from our website, any software or hardware products that can send a HTTP string command out can integrate with our IPPoE products. This is, I will admit, a little bit of a get out of jail free card for us. And we often utilize this. It's also exceedingly easy to carry out as well, because we've got a HTTP command creator that you can download off the website, and it's literally just a case of clicky box exercise of what features you want the lamp to do, and then you install that as an output from the device that's going to be doing it. The best way that we see the IP side of things is working is in conjunction with some degree of camera analytics. So as I mentioned, that could be an edge-based analytics function, such as the Axis A cap, where it's just all built onto the camera itself, or it could be via a full-blown VMS installation. Um, Ultimately, though, if you've got no light, then camera analytics are going to suffer. And this is really where lighting, I think, plays a pivotal role, especially when you're using some analytics. So just to give you an example of this, here's a site over in Australia. Image on the left, low light camera with no light. And as you can see, actually, if you ignored all of those false alarms that you can see popping up on the screen, the image itself isn't particularly terrible to the human eye, of course, but to a camera who sees all of that noise, all of that movement in the image, that's obviously acting to propose a number of false alarms. And especially if you're talking about a remote site, you don't want to be getting people out onto site in the case of an event, time and money, of course. So image on the right there, we've got a low light camera with just a small infrared lamp. I believe this was one of the 8-watt Vario 2i2s, fairly short range application. And in doing so, we've been able to improve the image. You can see that it's no doubt brighter, but more importantly, to the camera, it's not receiving as much noise, and so it is not creating the same amount of false alarms. I've actually personally got another little kind of mental case study. So a project carried out with Vigilon for Bentley Motors. And it was a very cool one because it was where they were keeping their prototype vehicles. So they weren't actually worried about people breaking anything or stealing anything. They were worried specifically about espionage, people coming in trying to take photographs of their next generation cars and new features, etc. Now they had a Vigilon set up with their AI analytics, and during daytime obviously worked perfectly fine, and at nighttime they had enough ambient light so that the images were looking satisfactory. However, the analytics, the accuracy of which just wasn't high enough. So we were called in. In that particular case, we installed our big Vario 2 i16-1 panels. So they're the largest single panels that we do. We blasted the area with light, and they were actually getting higher accuracy at nighttime than they were during daytime. So happy customer in that case. And the reason for that is because with the infrared, we're able to create a greater degree of contrast between the foreground and the background. So the individual that's being picked up by the infrared and what they're standing on or standing like in front of. And that just allows the camera to be able to work so much or perform so much better and achieve a greater degree of accuracy. Other benefits of using the Vario products is firstly interchangeable lenses. So again, when we're talking about constantly changing sites, constantly changing applications. These the towers might be installed one day along the perimeter of a building, and in which case you're wanting a narrower field of view further distance. Next day it goes over to a wind farm where you're covering a big stretch of land, but still trying to go as far as you can. And so having the Vario 2 interchangeable lenses, which is incredibly simple to operate, allows any individual lamp go from that 10-degree spotlight to 120 degrees. And we've got enough lenses in between that in order to satisfy any requirement, both elliptical beam angles and circular beam angles, depending on also the horizontal field of view that vertical field of view, sorry, that is required. Next is the very remote control. So if you're not using an IP product and you still want to have a degree, say we're talking about the photo cell sensitivity, you still can get that just with a standard low voltage product. So you'd be able to use the very remote control to uh, commission the site ad hoc once it's been installed, fine tuning perhaps the power output, photo cell sensitivity, and if it's a white light product, you can decide how long you want the white light lamp to be triggered on for. You can also apply a degree of additional security in the way of a pin setting too. other considerations. So one of the key aspects of the mobile security towers, which we've kind of already touched on, is the fact that they're going to be installed into sites where perhaps, well, they don't have power for one reason or another. Maybe it's too remote, or perhaps it's just not quite got to that phase of construction. And so we see a number of different methods. You might have them powered over just a standard petrol generator, for example, or we're seeing a great increase in the use of solar panels. So not only is it a flexible use of the towers, but also it's environmentally friendly, which I think is something that we're certainly all trying to aim to achieve. Now, our products, our standard low voltage products, are 12 to 24 volts AC DC. And so they work very nicely with a solar powered setup in conjunction with a charger and then a battery powering the lamps directly. And we have a good customer over in Australia called Vision Eye, who utilize this commonly throughout their installations. Of course, over in Australia, they have the privilege of many hours of sunlight in order to do so, but we do have enough over here, even in the what is a very grim northeast at the moment. The idea being, of course, that you store all of that energy up through the daytime, and that gives you enough power in order to power your products over through the nighttime hours, the dark hours. Another consideration is the hotspot reduction technology. So mobile surveillance providers can help ensure that good images are achieved by selecting illuminators that use something like this. So what we call the Vario 2 hotspot reduction technology, or HRT. Essentially, the key difference between this and what you might find in a built-in infrared is that with the built-in infrared, you're limited to whatever angle the LED optics are set at. And obviously, they're going to give you the best of both worlds. So they might have a couple of different optics in there to satisfy the majority of applications. But if you're trying to fine-tune your zoom to satisfy the full width of scene that's required, you might end up with a degree of hotspot where you're getting overexposure. And so by using the lighting with our lenses and hotspot reduction technology, we can again ensure that you're achieving the correct uniformity of light, which is obviously crucial in achieving the best quality images. So I've got a little video here just to show you about performance as well. So here we've got, I believe it's an Axis P series camera, but I don't know the exact type. And again, if we zoom into this image, we can see our colleague Ben here. And again, this is where you'd say, well, the integrated infrared is doing a perfectly fine job, and actually the infrared lamp in conjunction with is fairly similar, but this is very, very short range. And I think actually you see the real performance increase when you start to zoom out and to look at further afield. And so we decided to call this supercharging your bullet camera, because ultimately by using additional lighting, which has only a fraction of a cost increase over the whole system, but also importantly for these types of applications, only has a fractional increase in consumption from an energy standpoint, which is obviously very important for remote sites which are using solar or a backup generator, a generator. But you're able to increase the performance dramatically of your cameras, and that's really the main point that we're trying to make here. So with only a marginal increase in cost and a marginal increase in power requirement, the performance increase is quite dramatic. So in summary, what are we looking at? So flexible, easy to deploy surveillance solutions. Obviously, that's the cornerstone of these applications. I think hopefully we've been able to ascertain that dedicated lighting is a critical component to these, and definitely second on the list in terms of what you're going to include when you're coming up with a modular system. Network capability is key, perhaps in some cases, perhaps not in others, but I think the advantage to you as an installer or an integrator, and is great from a commissioning standpoint, but also the flexibility and adaptability, the added value to the customer is definitely there. And then obviously there's a whole host of other considerations that you have to take into account with regards to the products that you're specifying in there. So we've roughly kept to our time limit here. Hopefully you've got some questions. I will wait a couple of minutes to see if there are any in the chat box, and then we'll go through them. So thank you very much for your time if you're leaving us here, and if you do have any questions, please let me know. So we've got a question here from Thomas regarding maximum distances for infrared products. So this is an interesting one, actually. So maximum distance for the i16 that I mentioned previously is 500 meters at a 10-degree spot. However, that product is just under 100 watts consumption. So more commonly for these types of applications, we see our smaller range products. So the Vario i2-1, which is capable of 78 meters at a 10-degree spot. The i4, which is 12 watts, which would give you 144 meters, and the i6, which is just under 25 watts, which gives you 200 meters. I think ultimately when we're talking about applications that have to balance that performance aspect, but also the power, you'll often see the smaller range of products which are able to give you that impact, but also not take too much of your power bandwidth. Christian has asked, do you have a tool to design the infrared illuminator for ALPR cameras? So we don't have a tool, but we have an in-house method of calculating how much light is required. So typically what we'll ask you for is distance and angle, obviously as per usual, but we'll also ask you for the camera setup. So for example, the most important of which is shutter speed. So the faster your shutter speed, the less light is hitting your camera sensor, and therefore we've got calculations using the inverse square law to decide how much additional light is required to achieve the correct level of power for that type of application. So Collins asks, do you find that remote sites without power are also too remote for internet access? Yes, I mean, ultimately it's very application dependent, but I think on one of the images we showed it had a whopping great big antennae for that exact reason. And ultimately also it depends on if it's actually required, you know. Usually these installations are going to go back to an arc, so they do need to have some degree of connectivity, but perhaps you know, in terms of integration side, that could also all be done on the edge, so all be done within that particular tower, and then all you're feeding back is the images. But ultimately, yeah, I think that the mobile security installations need to have a degree of wireless capability because they need to be beaming back somewhere. Christine's given me some installation for or typical setup parameters for AMPR, so 1/1000, 1/100, 15 meters and such. Christine, I'll get back to you on email, and we can have a chat with regards to the right product for you. Apologies if this is an incorrect pronunciation of your name, Vasilis. But yes, we are recording this, and we are going to be posting this onto our YouTube channel. So I believe you'll get a follow-up email with a link to that, and we will also be able to send you over the slides if you wish to have those. Stefan has asked, or sorry, Chris is asking, we have found out that some AI cameras have problems with green or blue LED light. Do you also have this problem with your LEDs? No, so our lighting, specifically white light and infrared, is purposefully designed to assist cameras in their vision so that they are what we would consider to be optimal for a standardized security CCTV or analytics-based setup. The green lighting, it's definitely become a niche area, whether that be for ecological reasons or just as almost a bit of a branding exercise. But there is a benefit there in terms of if somebody knows what that green light means, then it can act as a visual deterrent. So I definitely understand that, and I can see that as being a benefit, but it's definitely at the detriment of your cameras. So as mentioned, this is something that we could potentially do if that's a definitive requirement, but it's certainly not what we would be initially designing into an application or specifying ourselves. Um, Got one more question here from John. So why would you use infrared in built-up areas, street lighting, that kind of thing? We've actually got an excellent image or video actually showing why using off-axis lighting such as street lighting can be at the detriment of your images. So we might be able to share that too as part of this. But essentially, if you're using a low light camera with just regular street lighting, of course that lighting isn't lighting up exactly what your camera is seeing, so you fall foul to the classic silhouetting. Where you could miss crucial information, and we had a really nice video showing this, how you can lose complete clarity of somebody's face, for example, by just using the general area lighting that's available. Even again, if the overall image quality looks perfectly fine, when you zoom into the areas of interest, you might find that you lose information. Ultimately, the best case scenario is always to use a dedicated light with your camera to light up exactly what that camera is viewing. And that looks like the final questions for now. I will wait on for a few more minutes just in case there's any other questions that come through. But otherwise, thank you all for attending. Much appreciate your time this morning, and we'll speak shortly. Thank you.